I recognize the member for Timiskaming Cochrane.
And it's, before I begin my remarks, it's going to be a tough job being the follow-up for an opening act like that. But I think I'd like to start with a few things, talking about this time allocation motion here. A few things I think that we could all agree on, Mr. Speaker. That all 107 members of this House, we all work hard for our constituents. I believe the majority, I believe all of us were in one way or another elected because our constituents believed that we could speak for them, that we would speak for them. They believed that. I think we can all agree. Let's start on something that we can all agree on, Mr. Speaker. And I've been here for 2.5 years, and it's an interesting place. But all the people that I've dealt with in this House, I have respect for them all, and they all have the same goal. And up until today, and up until this motion, I believe we did all have the same goal. Because we all had the ability to stand here and give our views of our constituents, the views of our stakeholders, whether we agreed or disagreed, but give their view. We all had that ability up until this motion. And this is crossing, and I understand this line has been crossed many times. But we've heard, and we hear about the election, and yes, the Liberals won more seats than the others. Granted. But that doesn't mean that the other side, that we shouldn't have a right to speak. And that's what this time allocation motion is doing. It's giving only certain people a right to speak. What I find most egregious, what we find most egregious about this, we're not against this bill. We aren't against this bill. And we weren't trying to slow this bill down. We have members, I have members, and I will have one of my colleagues after will have remarks specifically to the bill. We weren't trying to slow this bill down. We don't understand why you need the hammer. I understand time allocation. I don't agree with it. But I understand how a government, in extreme situations, when the opposition is actually trying to stall or trying to, but in this case, this is pure impatience or just lack of regard, and not only, Mr. Speaker, not only lack of regard for the members in this House, because that's not the people I'm really worried about. It's lack of regard for the constituents, but even greater, and if you take this bill as an example, Bill, I believe it's 18. It's a good, there are portions of this bill that are very good. Some not so good. But this bill, what it's meant to make, what's it called, stronger workplaces, or anyway, it's to protect people in precarious jobs. That's a good idea. But you know what? You know what's really not good is you also know not only are you reducing debate here. And I remember one time I spoke in this bill, and we have privileges here. I can stand up today and I can speak on this bill. Until my colleagues can't, because you're shutting the time off. But because of this time allocation motion, and because you're only holding one day of hearing here, if you are serious about protecting people in precarious workplaces, perhaps it would have been a good idea to have a couple days of hearings in places where actually those people live and work. That's the idea of making government more accessible to people. Because in here, it's not accessible to most people. And someone who is involved right now in precarious work or is fighting to get a year's back wages, someone who's fighting to that, they're not, and if they're somewhere in the reaches of my riding or the member of Algoma Manitoulin or anywhere outside of downtown Toronto, how are they going to get to Toronto to tell their story? And there's no thought was given to that. The only thought was given to making it work for the government, for the governing party. Good legislation should work for the people. And that's a big, big problem. This bill is also, it's two bills put together with two different issues. Both issues, actually, once again, that our caucus don't oppose. We don't oppose either. But it's not to say, well, we've had all this debate. No, we haven't had that debate on this bill. And if you look closely at this bill, if you look where the where the minister may order a specified date which review under subsection, that's for the minimum wage. So after this time allocation, that will never come to this House again. And that's also a problem. Very quiet now, everybody, so I guess I'm not having the same impact as my friend Mr. Jakubowski. It depends. But it is... One of the members of the governing party said I was talking sense, and that's because I disagree with this party. That's because I really believe, and we really believe, that members should have the ability to speak to a bill. Should members have the ability to block continuously? I don't know if we should have that ability, but to say that, man, you have 6 hours, 6.5 hours, we have heard enough. And then if you look further in the motion, and that the committee shall report the bill to the House no later than Tuesday, November 4th, 2014. In an event that the committee fails to report the bill on that day, the bill shall be deemed to be passed by the committee and shall be deemed to be reported to and received by the House. Basically, it doesn't really matter. Those people who do come to the committee, it doesn't really matter. So here, you've got legislation that's supposed to protect people, and you're not even really trying to make an effort as a government to be open. And we've heard this time and time again, to be transparent. Well, part of the issue about being transparent as a government, Mr. Speaker, is actually open yourself up and go out to the people. And they're going to say, oh, but we won the election, and you did win the election. But they didn't win the election on this bill. And if you're serious about precarious people in precarious jobs, people who are fighting for back wages, if you're serious about that, would have made an attempt to go where those people are. To go where this bill is about minimum wage and precarious unemployment. Precarious employment. So, and that's really, really an issue. Time allocation. There's, en français, ils ont imposé.
In French, it means they gagged us.
And that's what this is. Time allocation sounds like, oh, it's time management, or it's speeding things up. That's not what it is. Time allocation is picking a few people who can speak and then basically make the decision. One side makes the decision and they move on. And I am sure that that is not what the people of Ontario expected when they heard the Premier talk about transparency. on this first bill of this session. I'm sure they weren't expecting a gag order on the first bill of this session. A bill that everyone was, at least on this, our caucus was perfectly willing to work with. We have never said that we didn't support this bill. So why? Again, I guess the question that comes from us to the government is what? When you publicly say you want democracy to work, why don't you let it work? Really? Why don't you let it work? If it's difficult to understand what makes a governing party believe that they only have the best ideas. We've heard it several times. Several times I've heard it. I heard it today that this was the, if I have the quote, the best government we've ever had. Really? Really? Again, the best government, if you look through history, the best governments. I wasn't here when Mr. McGuinty was the Premier. But it did sound to me as if he did go out to the people after and talk to them on individual bills, talk to stakeholders on individual bills. In this case, talk to people who were fighting for their wages. Talk to people who were fighting for their wages. Talk to people who have to raise a family on minimum wage. That's what government should be doing. And that's not what this government's doing. I'm going to get a little... My father, I think we've all learned things from our parents, and I learned a few things from my father. And we would go to auctions. I'm a farmer by trade. And we would go to auctions. And I was a little boy, and my dad was showing me things. And he told me, he said, the most powerful people in the room don't show their power. And the people who are bidding like this aren't the people who are controlling the auction, the people who bid with the wink. But they don't display their power. And he told me, honest people don't have to tell you they're honest. He told me, if someone has to tell you that they're honest, beware. And I think if my dad was still alive today, he'd say the same thing about people who keep having to call themselves transparent. A truly transparent government doesn't have to talk about being transparent. A government that truly believes in democracy practices it. Thank you. And that's very, very, very important. Something, and maybe it hits harder for people who live a long ways away from this glorious place we call Queen's Park. But I remember I subbed in for, I believe it was Committee on Social Policy, it was a LINS review. And we ended up in a town, I believe, Van Cleek Hill, I think. It was close to your riding. But I remember those people in they were a bit shocked that the government was in Van Cleek Hill. But it made a big impression on those people. That government actually came to their part of the world and actually let them present. And that is how to show that you truly care about people. It's not about, you know what? We're going to debate this for 6 hours, and we're having this, and whether this committee comes up with anything or not, we don't care. That's what they're saying. We don't care. It's going to pass. the government has the power to pass this bill, but it also should have the prerogative to actually listen to the people who are impacted by this bill. Today we had a question by the Minister to the Minister of Transport about a road condition in Northern Ontario. Again, it's a long ways away. And last Thursday, we had a discussion on making a committee to look at roads. And I'm going to roads because why this government, why democracy in a big province like this has to reach out farther. You can't just make the rules here. And I'm elected to represent my constituents, but again, if government came closer to my constituents and came closer to other people's constituents, we would make better decisions, better policies. And the reason I'll give why, an example, why government cannot be central as what this bill is doing, or this motion. We talked last Thursday about reducing gridlock around the province. And in that session I spoke about, there's a big sign. One of those, like when I come down 400 onto 401, it says 401 express lanes moving slowly. That sign. We have one outside of my house, 6.5 hours from here. And they changed it, Mr. Speaker. They changed it this week. And what that sign says now is give motorcycles ample space. It was snowing, Mr. Speaker, when I went to work here. So once again, that decision was made. It wasn't, whoever changed that sign did not change it in Northern Ontario, because we don't have many motorcycles in Northern Ontario right now. We have a few, but not a lot. July is a great weather for motorcycles, but not October. It would be the same as if the signs for Temiskaming Shores were changed, or the signs for Toronto were changed in Temiskaming Shores. Because then that sign, the sign that when you come off 400 onto 401, instead of saying 401 east moving slowly, it would say, watch out for moose. and that's what people have to understand. This province isn't just here. This province is a microcosm of different people, different places, and it's great because of that. But to be truly great, we have to work on governing it like that. And there's huge parts of the province that feel incredibly ignored. Yes. And motions like this that say, you know what, if you want to speak on this bill, we really want public participation, but you have to come to Toronto for your 5 minutes. And by the way, if you read the motion closely, we don't care what you say anyway. Read it closely. That's what it says. And that's a problem, Mr. Speaker. We are in favor of the bill, strongly opposed to this motion. Thank you.